Hello everyone, I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today we'll explore a wedding that isn't about luxury or spectacle, but about choices, forgiveness, and quiet courage. What happens when love is no longer a promise of happiness, but a decision to stay after everything has already been broken? Subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapter of this story. James stood at the wooden gate as the morning gathered around the small ceremony space, carrying memories heavier than the suit on his shoulders. He remembered returning home after years of pride, conflict, and silence, learning to bow his head before his father's stubborn love. Today, he was not a CEO, not a runaway son, but a man choosing responsibility. When he saw Diep waiting, calm and steady, he understood that marriage was not escape. It was a decision to stay, to repair, to build slowly with patience for generations, watching, forgiving, and promising endurance beyond celebration alone together forever. Diep adjusted her breath while standing near the bamboo grove, feeling the quiet strength of the wooden house behind her. She had lived a life shaped by restraint, care, and silent endurance, never asking for rescue, never demanding certainty. Loving James meant accepting his past, his family wounds, and his ongoing struggle between ambition and belonging. Today, she was not nervous, only grounded. Marriage, to her, was not a dream fulfilled, but a path chosen consciously. She believed love should be calm, practical, and brave, capable of surviving ordinary days, misunderstandings, and long winters without applause or grand declarations. Mr. Hoan watched from a short distance, leaning on his cane, pretending calm while emotion tightened his chest. He had once ruled his household with authority, believing success required distance and discipline. Losing James had taught him a painful lesson about pride and silence. Seeing his son return, transformed but still familiar, softened something unspoken inside him. This wedding was not merely a union of two young people, it was a quiet reconciliation between generations. Mr. Hoan understood that forgiveness rarely arrived with words. Sometimes it appeared as presence, patience, and shared responsibility under one roof. Mrs. Hoan stood beside her husband, holding his arm with a firmness born from decades of shared struggle. She had been the bridge during years of conflict, carrying messages, calming tempers, and believing in eventual return. Watching Diep, she felt gratitude rather than judgment. She knew a woman like Diep did not seek wealth or status, only stability and mutual respect. Mrs. Hoan believed marriages survived not because of romance, but because of daily kindness. She hoped her son would learn that strength was not control, but the ability to listen and change without losing dignity. Hung arrived quietly, without ceremony, standing slightly behind the guests from the woodworking factory. He had always lived in James's shadow, carrying different expectations, different burdens. Yet today, envy had no place. He saw his brother choosing a life simpler than power, heavier than money. Hung respected that choice deeply. His presence was silent support, a reminder that family loyalty did not require loud declarations. As the ceremony prepared to begin, Hung felt something ease inside him, as if an old competition finally dissolved into mutual understanding and unspoken respect. Tieu Ca held Hung's hand, smiling gently while observing the gathering. She understood the weight this day carried for everyone present. To her, marriage was not perfection, but alignment, two people agreeing to face hardship together. She admired Diep's composure and James's humility. Watching them, she felt reassured about her own choices. Love, she believed, should never feel like performance. It should feel like home. Standing there, she silently wished the couple endurance, honesty, and the courage to remain ordinary when life tempted them toward excess or pride. The guests from the woodworking factory gathered respectfully, wearing simple clothes, bringing with them the scent of sawdust and honest labor. They had known Diep as a diligent worker, someone who listened more than she spoke, someone dependable. Seeing her today, they felt collective pride. This wedding was not extravagant, but it felt sincere. They understood that stability was built like furniture, piece by piece, measured carefully, mistakes corrected patiently. For them, this ceremony represented continuity, proof that hard work, loyalty, and integrity could shape a meaningful future. As the officiant began speaking, silence settled naturally without instruction. Birds moved among the bamboo, and the wooden house stood as a quiet witness. The words spoken were simple, avoiding poetry, focusing instead on commitment and responsibility. James listened carefully, aware that vows were not promises of happiness but agreements of effort. Diep met his gaze steadily, without expectation or fear. In that moment, both understood marriage as an ongoing practice, not a destination. It required attention, humility, and the willingness to choose each other repeatedly, especially during unremarkable days. When it came time for vows, James spoke without rehearsed elegance. He admitted his flaws openly, acknowledging his tendency to run, to prioritize achievement over connection. He promised to remain present, even when uncomfortable, even when uncertain. Diep responded with equal honesty, promising steadiness rather than sacrifice, partnership rather than submission. Their words did not impress the crowd, but they resonated deeply. This exchange felt less like performance and more like negotiation. Two adults outlining terms of mutual respect, accountability, and shared growth without illusion. Little Nee stood near the front, holding a small bouquet with both hands, watching intently. She did not fully understand marriage, but she understood belonging. Seeing Diep smile and James bow slightly as he spoke, she sensed safety. To her, this day meant continuity, a promise that the adults around her were choosing stability. When she smiled, the tension among the guests softened. Children often revealed truth without effort. Her presence reminded everyone that love was not abstract. It shaped environments, routines, and the emotional landscape future generations would inherit. After the vows, there was no dramatic applause, only warm, sustained clapping that felt earned. Mr. Hoan nodded slowly, accepting the moment with quiet approval. Mrs. Hoan wiped her eyes discreetly. Hung exhaled, shoulders loosening. The factory workers exchanged glances, satisfied. This was not a spectacle, but a conclusion of long, emotional labor. The ceremony affirmed that reconciliation did not erase history, but it allowed movement forward. Everyone present understood that this marriage symbolized repair, not perfection, continuity rather than transformation, realism instead of fantasy. As the couple bowed to their parents, the gesture carried layered meaning. Respect was given without submission, gratitude without debt. James bowed deeply, acknowledging the cost of rebellion and the patience required for return. Diep bowed with sincerity, accepting her role not as replacement, but as addition. Mr. Hoan and Mrs. Hoan responded with equal humility, understanding that authority shifted with time. This exchange marked a rebalancing of power within the family, one based less on command and more on mutual recognition and evolving responsibility. The ceremony concluded without fanfare, yet no one rushed away. Conversations unfolded slowly, restrained but warm. Tea was poured, simple food shared. Laughter appeared naturally, unforced. James and Diep moved among the guests, attentive, grounded, unassuming. They were not celebrating an ending, but a beginning shaped by awareness. As the wooden house absorbed their voices and footsteps, it felt as though the space itself accepted the new arrangement. This marriage had begun exactly where it needed to begin, quietly, honestly, and without illusion. After the ceremony, the space did not empty as weddings often do. Instead, it transformed. The formal stillness dissolved into a quieter intimacy, where people moved closer rather than drifting apart. James felt this shift immediately. The weight he had carried through the vows loosened, replaced by a grounded awareness of where he stood. He was no longer performing a role. He was inhabiting a choice. Walking beside Diep, he sensed that the day was not ending but unfolding into something slower, more enduring than celebration. They sat together at a simple wooden table, sharing tea poured by hands that had known them for years. Conversation flowed gently, touching on work, seasons, small worries, and familiar humor. No one spoke about the future in grand terms. Instead, they spoke about tomorrow's tasks, about repairs at the workshop, about weather and harvest. James realized that this was the true beginning of marriage, not speeches, but inclusion in ordinary life. Diep listened attentively, occasionally adding a thought, her presence calm and reassuring, anchoring the moment. As afternoon light softened, James stepped aside briefly, standing near the wooden house that had witnessed so many turning points. He thought about the life he had once chased, measured in deals and numbers, applause and distance. None of that felt false, but it felt incomplete. Here, surrounded by people who expected consistency rather than brilliance, he felt something closer to integrity. Marriage, he understood, was not a retreat from ambition, but a redefinition of success. It demanded reliability, humility, and patience over time. Diep watched him from afar, recognizing the familiar expression of inward reflection. She had seen this look before, during moments when James confronted his own contradictions. She did not interrupt. She believed love allowed space for silence and thought. When he returned, she simply reached for his hand. No words were exchanged, yet understanding passed between them easily. This quiet coordination reassured her. Partnership did not require constant explanation. It required trust in shared direction, even when paths were not fully mapped. Mr. Hoan observed the couple with careful attention. In the past, he might have offered advice, corrections, or warnings. Today, he chose restraint. He had learned that control often damaged what it sought to protect. Watching James move with ease among the guests, he recognized maturity not as dominance, but as adaptability. Mr. Hoan felt relief rather than pride. The future no longer rested on his authority alone. Responsibility had shifted, and he was willing, finally, to accept that transition. Later, a small gathering formed near the bamboo grove, where laughter grew louder, fueled by shared memories and gentle teasing. Hung joined James, speaking candidly about work pressures, about choices that lingered unmade. James listened without judgment. The rivalry that once shaped their relationship had softened into mutual recognition. They were different men, carrying different obligations, but no longer measuring themselves against each other. Hung realized that his brother's return had not diminished him. It had freed them both from unspoken competition. Tieu Ca added her voice occasionally, grounding the conversation with practical insight. She spoke about balance, about knowing when to push forward and when to hold steady. Her perspective reflected lived experience rather than theory. Diep appreciated this honesty. She valued relationships where advice emerged naturally, without hierarchy. The women exchanged glances that conveyed respect and quiet solidarity. Marriage, they understood, was sustained not only by spouses, but by the network of people who offered guidance without interference. As evening approached, the guests began preparing to leave, not abruptly, but gradually, as if reluctant to disturb the atmosphere. Each farewell felt deliberate, carrying blessings expressed more through tone than words. The workers from the factory shook James's hand firmly, acknowledging his decision to remain connected rather than distant. To them, leadership was demonstrated through presence. James accepted their gestures with humility, aware that trust was built slowly and maintained through consistency. Little Ly lingered near Diep, helping gather small items from the table. She asked simple questions about what would change now that the wedding was over. Diep answered honestly, explaining that many things would remain the same. They would still wake early, still work, still face challenges. Marriage, she said, meant choosing to face those challenges together. Ly nodded, satisfied. The reassurance mattered. Stability, she sensed, was not about ceremony, but about continuity. When the last guest departed, silence returned, but it was no longer anticipatory. It felt earned. James and Diep stood together, surveying the space as if seeing it anew. The wooden house seemed warmer, more inhabited. This place, once a setting for tension and reconciliation, now carried a different significance. It was not merely shelter, but foundation. James felt a responsibility deeper than any contract he had signed. This commitment could not be delegated or postponed. They began cleaning together, moving without instruction, each anticipating the other's actions. Plates were stacked, chairs arranged, remnants of the day quietly folded away. This shared labor felt symbolic rather than burdensome. It reflected the rhythm they intended to maintain. No task was beneath them. No responsibility belonged to one alone. Diep felt gratitude, not because James helped, but because he understood without being asked. As night settled, they sat on the steps of the wooden house, listening to distant sounds of the forest. James spoke about fear, admitting that part of him still worried about failing, about reverting to old habits. Diep did not dismiss these concerns. She acknowledged them, reminding him that awareness itself was a form of protection. They agreed that honesty would be their safeguard even when uncomfortable. Silence followed, not awkward but reflective, allowing their words to settle. James thought about the road ahead, not as a linear progression, but as terrain requiring navigation. There would be conflicts, compromises, moments of doubt. Yet he felt equipped in a way he had not before. Marriage, he realized, was not a guarantee against loss, but a commitment to resilience. It offered no immunity, only partnership. That felt sufficient, more than sufficient. It felt real. Diep leaned against him, considering her own expectations. She did not imagine perfection. She imagined mornings where they moved in sync, evenings where conversation mattered more than entertainment, days where disagreements were handled with respect. She knew effort would be required, not occasionally but continuously. This did not discourage her. It reassured her. Love that demanded nothing often endured little. Love that asked for attention could grow. In the following days, life resumed its familiar pace. Work continued, obligations returned, routines reasserted themselves. Yet something subtle had shifted. James approached decisions with greater deliberation, considering impact beyond immediate gain. Diep noticed this change, not as dramatic transformation, but as consistent adjustment. The household settled into patterns shaped by mutual consultation. Marriage did not erase individuality. It aligned priorities. Mr. Hoan observed these changes quietly, resisting the urge to comment. He recognized that growth occurred best without constant evaluation. His role now was support, not supervision. Mrs. Hoan found comfort in this new dynamic, sensing harmony rather than tension. The family structure felt less rigid, more responsive. Authority flowed rather than imposed. As weeks passed, the memory of the wedding did not fade into nostalgia. It integrated into daily reference, a reminder of intention rather than spectacle. James and Diep did not revisit vows often, but they referenced their meaning through action. When disagreements arose, they addressed them early. When fatigue set in, they acknowledged it rather than assigning blame. These practices, unremarkable to outsiders, formed the backbone of their union. The story of their marriage did not conclude with celebration. It continued in workshops, kitchens, quiet evenings, and difficult conversations. It unfolded without soundtrack or spotlight. Yet within its simplicity lay depth. James and Diep had not chosen an easy path. They had chosen a sustainable one. And in that choice, made repeatedly and deliberately, their marriage found its enduring strength. James and Tieu Diep's wedding unfolds in a quiet space near a woodworking factory, shaped by labor, memory, and choice rather than spectacle. Friends and workers prepare the setting with their own hands, reflecting a shared history of hardship and loyalty. James arrives early, confronting his past in silence, while Tieu Diep prepares with calm certainty, choosing marriage as an act of awareness, not escape. Family tensions surface gently as Mr. Hoan offers a restrained apology, and James accepts without drama. Hoan and Tieu Ca attend in quiet support, signaling unspoken reconciliation. The ceremony emphasizes responsibility over romance, presence over promises. Their vows reject perfection and dependence, focusing instead on honesty, endurance, and partnership. Baini's innocent role symbolizes the future, while simple rituals anchor the moment in reality. As the celebration fades into shared meals and quiet reflection, a new family forms through forgiveness, maturity, and the decision to remain together.